is not available, and I'm not entirely sure why. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. I think it's just because it's still starting. Because it's good on restream.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Voters of Tomorrow Republican National Convention pre-show. We thank you all for being here. Today, I am joined by Gaffney. Gaffney is our national organization and chapter developer. Colin is our communications director. Santiago is our executive director, and Justin is our finance director. Thank you all for being here and willing to discuss tonight. It'll be a good time. We have about an hour, so we'll see how this goes, and I'm really just excited to jump into this. Does anyone have anything to say?
Just excited.
Us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Voters Tomorrow, and you can also find us online at votersoftomorrow.org. So let's just jump right into this. So Santiago, give us a brief, broad rundown of what's happening. How many days is it going to be? How long each day,
Yes,
and
so
where
the
can people
Republican
find
National
it?
Convention starts today in about a half an hour, even though the networks aren't officially carrying it until 9 Eastern. It's being broadcast in all major networks, all cable news channels. I believe the Republicans are streaming it on YouTube, Twitch, I believe Periscope as well, so basically every channel we are on. It's not as easy to access everywhere. I joked about the RNC being accessible from your Apple Watch last time, but everyone who wants to watch it should be able to watch it. Everyone should have a device that can tune in.
Okay, great. And Justin, where will it be taking place?
Yeah, so a large majority of the official business that's going to be happening is taking place in Charlotte, North Carolina. But much like the DNC, we're going to see speeches spread all throughout the country. President Trump is going to be giving his acceptance speech from the White House. Mike Pence is going to be giving his from Fort McHenry in Maryland. Mike Pompeo is going to be in Israel, and we're going to see the rest of the Trump family giving their speeches from the Rose Garden. So it's going to be spread throughout, but the official business that's taking place is going to be in North Carolina.
Okay, and why is Charlotte?
Where they can host it. So I think Charlotte is important because the president's trying to win over these suburban voters. So I think it's important that he shows the full force of the GOP and what he believes is his winning message to people in these areas. These suburban areas and these urban areas.
Okay, and Colin, let's just get into the different agendas. As you all have mentioned, we've already seen the DNC, and so we have a good grasp on their agenda. The Trump administration, I believe, just publicized theirs today. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
What
yesterday.
is the Trump administration's agenda for the 2020 election, Colin?
Well, I believe they released it ahead of their convention, but I have it pulled up right here. They released it in bullet points, just like goals they want to see accomplished in a potential second Trump term. We didn't really see much policy tied to this, just like brief agenda points. And they're pretty optimistic. So he detailed a plan to eradicate COVID-19, and his goal is to develop a vaccine by the end of 2020. In America. So that's kind of his nationalistic side talking. And he wants America to be prepared for future pandemics. He was accused of like gutting the United States' resources for responding to the pandemic in 2018. His agenda here is really critical on China, and the Democrats have been pushing the message like defund the police. Excuse me. But he laid out a plan to actually increase funding for police departments, hire more police officers, and declare violent groups like Antifa, and I don't know if he mentions BLM, but like declare Antifa like a terrorist group, basically. So basically, red meat for his base. And he has like a lot of pretty optimistic stuff here. He talks about clean oceans and deregulating the energy sector. So while we don't have specific policy ideas here, we can kind of put together like how Trump plans to address like the climate. Instead of like regulations, he wants deregulation and maybe like working with American companies more to provide like tax credits or incentives for cleaner energy and
Gaffney, why don't you go ahead?
I have two questions for you. The first being, do you think the lack of policy is because the GOP recycled their 2016 platform? And two, do you agree with these agenda items? I mean, you're our resident Republican. We're looking for your commentary on it.
In my opinion, this does look like a good agenda. I really wish to have seen more policy tied to it. But I guess that's like up to Congress to kind of figure out what like after November 2020. And one thing that is pretty controversial about his agenda is under education, an issue I'm personally passionate about and more like liberal about. He wants to teach American exceptionalism in schools. People compared this to like Nazi Germany, so I want to get your guys' thoughts on this and see what the nation thinks about this rhetoric.
Yeah, so if I could jump in there, I agree with you that the agenda is pretty much optimistic because that's basically everything it
Yeah.
is. One of the things that I've been talking about is how it literally has no policy. It's a list of goals. It's like we're gonna create 10,000 jobs, but they never explain how. We're gonna get a coronavirus vaccine, but they never explain how. And then, like you mentioned, the most laughable part of it is the education goals, like teach American exceptionalism. A, what is American exceptionalism? B, how does the federal government mandate what is taught in schools at the state level? So, like Gaffney said, I think it's the Republican Party this year. It has no platform. They decided they're officially taking the mantle. As you guys might disagree with me on this, but they've decided they're officially becoming the Trump cult. They don't have an individual agenda. They just whatever Trump says is law, which is not necessarily a good way, in my perspective, for political parties to operate. I mean, we've seen it with the Republicans in the past, and we just saw it with Democrats, where the candidate has one agenda and the party has another, and there might be disagreements and discrepancies between those platforms. The Biden platform has really strict climate policies, while the DNC platform has no climate policies at all. But those disagreements between platforms make candidates and parties stronger, again, in my view. So, I mean, I don't know what the play is here because I mean, we all know, like you said, it's red meat for the base, and I think it might play really well with the base because it has what they want to see.
Yep.
It's we're going to declare Antifa a terrorist group and we're going to create jobs and we're going to get rid of Obamacare. But for people actually looking for policy, it's nothing. It's a list. It's a
They're
list
not
of
getting
goals.
much on that end. Yeah. I think it actually would have benefited the Republican Party to update their platform and to release more details. And of course, you see some policy in there, like passing term limits for Congress. But um, while I do like the bulleted list and like the goals on there, I don't see why, well, American exceptionalism and uh, defending the police, you might disagree on that. But other than that, I don't really see how people disagree. But it's like we need specific policy, and I hope Trump covers this in the debates and as he campaigns more heading to November.
I think we all can agree that we would all like to see some more firm policies from his administration, not because we don't like him, or I mean, I'll speak for myself, I guess, but it's because there's a certain protocol and a certain format that you follow going into the presidency, and we have kind of really failed to see that from him and his administration. Um, but that's just my personal opinion. Gaffney, what do you have to say?
The thing that's like pinging in the back of my head about teaching American exceptionalism is that in the Texas Education Agency's curriculum requirements for our high school graduation credits, the name of our economics course that you take senior year is not just GovEc, but economics with an emphasis on the free market system and its benefits. We're already teaching built into our economic education how America's economic system is definitely to be considered superior or something that should be at the forefront of economic education. So if we start influencing more American exceptionalism education into other courses, that could be an interesting shift in the way that Americans perform on global standardized tests. Like the AP exam is taken worldwide. Are Americans going to start performing differently or worse on that test because we're spending more time focusing on ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Justin, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, just going off what Santiago was talking about, I think it would be better to see even an opposing platform from the GOP and the RNC because, you know, the important part about the DNC's platform as opposed to Joe Biden's platform is one, may have pushed one to go a little more to the left or a little more to the right. The GOP can reflect that in their platform, and that would cause his campaign to nail down some of these more specific issues and strategies and how his, a second term under a Trump administration would look in terms of going about implementing those platforms.
I think if he has proven anything, it's that he can be, him and, his administration and him can be pretty unpredictable. But Santiago, so looking back, how does Donald Trump's previous decisions affect his campaign today? I'm talking like from 2016 to 2020. Obviously, you don't have to cover everything. But I mean, a main thing that I would like to touch on is how are the polling in 2000 to the 2020 election and just how he was being favored and how he, according to some polls, isn't right now, but according to some polls is right now. So I'm just curious on what you think about that.
Yeah, so current polling, like averages, have Donald Trump about 10 points down from Biden. It's definitely not the position you want to be in as incumbent president, especially 70 days out from an election. In 2016, you had Hillary Clinton, who consistently had a lead over Donald Trump, but the lead was significantly smaller. Hillary Clinton's lead, heading into election day, Hillary Clinton's lead was about 3 to 4 points, especially in swing states. Right now, Joe Biden is leading in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, for example. The lead is almost 8 points, which, again, if you're the incumbent president and you want to win re-election, that's not necessarily a good sign. You also have, you mentioned signs of things he had done in the past. 2016 was kind of a perfect storm for Democrats. You had a divided Democratic Party. You had a rising star, if you might call him that, in the Republican Party. Someone who was, I don't personally find him charismatic, but someone who could clearly call attention to himself. And you had one of if not the most controversial candidate in, well, on both sides actually, because Hillary Clinton, I mean, many people like her, I like her, but many people do not, and she was a generally disapproved of candidate. So all of those things put together, they created this perfect environment for Donald Trump to win. That is not happening in 2020. You have, I mean, Biden is an old, white, moderate Catholic Irish guy. He's simply not scary. You can you can call him a socialist, you can say he's a Trojan horse, you can say he's lost his mind, but at the end of the day, all those arguments are clearly backfiring. I mean, they lowered expectations for Biden so much that he could have come into the DNC stage and said, "My name is Joe Biden and I accept your nomination for president," and he would have been applauded by people on every side just because Donald Trump has been saying that he doesn't know who he is anymore. So the fact that they've lowered expectations so much for him is clearly backfiring. The fact that they're now saying he's a Trojan horse for the left kind of that notion was kind of killed when he chose Kamala Harris as his running mate. Even though she's pretty liberal, she's not really perceived as that liberal type of candidate. She's not a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren type of person. So they keep, I was saying the other day, they're just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. They have no strategy going forward, and I think that's pretty well reflected in what they're doing with the convention right now. I mean, we didn't even have a full speakers list until last night, which is kind of ridiculous when you consider people like us who have to make graphics for it. Or when you consider, I mean, cable companies who don't, well, cable news companies who don't, you can't, it's this weird situation where you're holding the actual convention in North Carolina, but your actual speakers are in Washington. But it's not actually the same event. So legally, you can't even call it the Republican National Convention, which is really weird again for people who have to talk about it, because, I mean, we're referring to it as the Republican National Convention, even though it actually is something else. And all that chaos put together is just a chaotic, I mean, there's no other way to describe it, a chaotic campaign strategy, which when you compare with the actual organized way Joe Biden has been running his campaign, is just not looking good for Donald Trump. If I were him, I would be praying for an October surprise, and I'm pretty sure he's working to get an October surprise where, wow, Ukraine just announced an investigation against Joe Biden. Because if he doesn't get that, he's going to get a blowout election. I mean, they're tied in Texas. I don't know how a Republican wins when they're tied in fucking Texas.
Okay, so Colin, who's speaking during this convention and why are they important? Like, just give me a few.
Well, I have the list here, and I can go through it and kind of highlight the important people. But tonight's the big night. I think the big names that are worth watching. Of course, we have Tim Scott, and he recently worked on a bill regarding like the current like BLM riots or protests, whatever you will, and we have a lot of House members speaking at the convention in general. I think Republicans are hoping to boost their chances in the House because, and I'm optimistic about the Republicans winning the presidency and holding the Senate, but not so much the House. My current predictions project the Democrats will keep the House, and I think that's the goal with having so many like House members speaking tonight and Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But we also have Nikki Haley tonight, and she's more of a a moderate neocon that's really like disliked by Trump's like far right conservative base, which is interesting because um, it really appeals to like all sides of the party, the neocon like George Bush people, and then the pro-Trump make America great again people who are more like socially conservative, but more on the left on certain issues. But Kim Klacik, House candidate in Baltimore. She has no chance, really, but she'll speak to the facts, or fact, whatever you want to call it, that Democrats are letting down Black people, and they've been in charge of like these major cities for generations, and nothing's really changed for them. But I guess the big speakers tonight are the McCloskeys. They're from my home state.
Yeah,
And if
please explain who they are.
um, well, you guys may not know the name, but the St. Louis couple who brandished guns at protesters.
You might also know
Now
them
you
as the
guys might
Purge
know who I'm
couple.
talking about.
Just wanted to chime in and say that.
Yeah. Yes, the Karen and Ken, as some people call them. But they're pretty divisive figures, and I'm interested to see what they have to say tonight because I don't know if the Democrats can really. I don't know if they will attack private citizens. And that's like another point I have to make. Nick Sandman is speaking. I don't know if they're going to really attack this kid from high school. But anyway, it'll really be interesting to see how the McCloskey speech plays out because it's really divided. You don't have like Democrats agreeing with Republicans and vice versa. So we'll see. I can
Let's
go
talk
through.
about
Yeah.
let's talk about Mike Pompeo because
Okay.
it's interesting to me because and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not common for cabinet members, like, current cabinet members to speak at national conventions. So what's that all about?
Um, Many Republicans, I think, see him as a rising star. There's speculation that he would run for Senate in Kansas, and obviously that did not happen. Roger Marshall is the nominee there, and that seat's looking better for Republicans that Chris Kobach is ousted. But people are also looking for potential 2024 candidates at this RNC, and Mike Pompeo's name has been floated. So I think he has a bright career ahead of him beyond Secretary of State. So it'll be interesting. I believe that's the reason why he has a speaker slot. And if any of you guys want to comment on that, go ahead.
Gaffney, did you have something to say?
Back about the McCloskeys, I don't need to speak on it now.
Okay. And then Justin?
Yeah, I just wanted to get everyone's opinion. I'm seeing that Pompeo's going to give his speech in Israel. So I just wanted to see what people were thinking about that, because like Ryan mentioned, it is abnormal, I think, for current cabinet members to speak, let alone do so in such a
Speak from Israel, yeah.
places.
So Republican International Convention, apparently.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah,
Santiago?
well, I mean, I think it's just posturing. Like Colin said, we are, aside from working to somehow revert the support bleed that Donald Trump has had this year, I think the convention is also meant to highlight possible 2024 candidates. And I mean, there's a reason Ben Sass is speaking, there's a reason Nikki Haley is speaking, there's a reason Mike
Yes.
Pompeo is speaking, because they're all considered really serious 2024 Republican candidates. So I think the fact that he's speaking for Israel is just posturing, if you want to put it that way. you basically get it all in that speech. You have, okay, so here's the Secretary of State. He's abroad, so he hasn't stopped doing his job to come speak here. He's still working even while he's here. He's in Israel. We all know there's a strong base of support for Israel within the Republican Party. So that's kind of the message they're trying to send. So this guy is working. He supports Israel. He's a strong Republican. He respects Israel, Judaism state. He respects Jews. You have all those different components that you can project and show strength behind a possible 2024 candidate. So I think that's kind of what they're trying to accomplish there. I mean, I obviously don't know. I haven't spoken to anyone involved in there, but I feel that's probably what they're going for.
As long as they don't tell Donald Trump that he's not being considered for 2024.
12 more years.
And Colin, did you have any one or two more people you wanted to go over, or are you good on that?
I mentioned Nick Sandmann, basically. A lot of Trumps are speaking, which is, kind of a little disappointing to some conservatives to have less variety in the speaker slot. Vernon Jones is speaking. He's a Georgia Democrat state rep who came out in support for Donald Trump, and Kristi Noem from South Dakota. She looks like a rising star within the party, but other than that, I think that's basically all that I would like to cover.
Okay, so in more recent news, I wanted to talk about this because this came out last night / this morning. This is for everyone, so feel free to put your opinion in on here. But why did Kellyanne Conway step down? And tying that into Gen Z, we know that her daughter Claudia is very big on TikTok, and she has amassed a following very quickly, unnaturally quickly. And her husband has recently left the Lincoln Project. So why is this significant? Let's go, Gaffney. What do you think about this?
Kellyanne Conway's daughter is applying for emancipation on the grounds that she is facing abuse from her parents because she doesn't follow their political beliefs. And this could end up being, if she goes through with it, if she applies for emancipation, if there is a hearing and this moves forward at all in any direction other than her permanent silencing because they're just going to revoke her cell phone rights. If this goes forward at all, it could be the first Trump administration official who faces hearings for something other than crimes from being in the administration. I've never seen any of her TikToks. I don't use TikTok. I had not heard her name before this morning when I heard the news, but I don't think that any of us are particularly surprised that a conservative power couple could potentially be abusing their child for not having their same ideology. That's something that I've experienced personally from my family, not from my parents, but this could end up being monumental if it sets precedent for other kids being able to apply for emancipation due to situations like this. Emancipation is so hard to achieve. The restrictions are so delicate. You have to prove that you're self-supporting. You have to prove that there's legitimate need to be removed from your parents' house. And in contrast to the Britney Spears conservatorship and how her father has again been renewed for another 6 months, and then right on the other side of that, we've got a child who could potentially be emancipated for political abuse.
She's been posting about it. She's on and Twitter for a while now. Colin, what do you think about the whole Kellyanne Conway situation?
I found out about this last night, and I was shocked.
We were actually
because I didn't watch
on Twitter, and she just told me Kellyanne left the White House.
Yeah. And yeah, I did watch some of her TikToks, as I demonstrated earlier. But anyway, I don't know what to make of this.
It's
I used to think,
interesting
like,
because they are humans. They're humans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
because I used to think like, oh, you can still like be married and be friends with someone despite political differences, but now we're finding out that their family life isn't so great. So it is kind of a big blow to like people hoping for more like unity across party lines. Very interesting. That's all I have to say.
Yes,
Santiago.
so I've been waiting to talk about this for maybe the last 24 hours. As no
It's
one
tea
will be
time.
surprised to know, I do not like Kellyanne Conway. I have mixed feelings about George Conway. I fully applaud Claudia Conway. I mean, I do not think it is easy to grow up in a house where your beliefs are so drastically different than those of your parents. And as I believe she mentioned in her tweet, those of her siblings. It must be a hell to live in where you believe you disagree on so many fundamental issues. I do, however, also believe that her parents have not managed this in the right way. I don't know how to manage it. I am not a parent, so I obviously can't comment on that. But when you look at it, her mom has been living in Washington, D.C. for almost 4 years now. Her dad has been, I don't think you get that many happy family dinners when your dad is running a super PAC to oust the president your mother works for. So
Yeah.
it I think it's an incredible situation from the outside perspective. I mean, I obviously feel bad for those involved, especially Claudia, if she actually has been abused like she says she has, and I have no reason to doubt her. But when you look at
Mhm.
it, you see Kellyanne Conway, who we all remember from Alternative Facts and the Bowling Green massacre. I don't know who's leading the remembrance ceremony anymore. I mean, poor all the people who died at the Bowling Green massacre are gonna need to find someone else to lead the remembrance ceremony. But but yeah, I mean, I just think I find it completely amazing. I don't think anyone saw this coming. And ever since she left, the fact that both she left the White House and George Conway left the Lincoln Project have given renewed support to the theory that Kellyanne Conway is actually anonymous and she wrote the book and she wrote the New York Times op-ed. So there's all these things coming together, which I just feel like I can't even formulate a complete thought on it just because it's so extraordinary and something we've never seen before in any capacity or any similar capacity. So I just think I just think it's incredible to see that happening in such a high profile conservative powerhouse family.
Yes.
Justin.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just a byproduct of the increased polarization that we've seen, especially over the last 4 years.
Yes.
Like Santiago said, it's a very high profile family, and it's hard to get along when you're working for such polar opposite end effects. So I think, while hopefully it doesn't become the new norm, I think it is going to become increasingly more common, even amongst regular Americans, that we're going to see friendships and family relationships begin to fall apart just over the basis of disagreements in political thought. And I think, at least in my opinion, I think, and I know Colin touched on this too, it's something that hopefully doesn't become all that common, but in such a high profile family and a high profile relationship, I understand why things started to snowball and end up where we are now.
Speaking on a personal level, I mean, I feel really bad and I hope the media treats them right with all this because
Yeah.
sure she was part of it, but at the end of the day, she's not anymore and none of them are. And I just honestly, I'm really hoping for the best for them because that is a mess and to have so many people involved in your personal business is super violating. And I know we're talking about it here tonight, but I think it is important to really touch on all the recent news going on, and that being one of them. In other recent news, this is for everyone again, so feel free once again to kind of raise your hand or something. What is your opinion on how the Trump administration has handled the Black Lives Matter movement? Is there justification for how long and drawn out some of these cases have been, or just how drawn out they are? Because, I mean, we've seen a bunch of examples of Black people who are shot innocently, some of them, and ultimately end up dying, or they're alive and their killers or people who injured them, the police officers, never end up actually being served justice. Like they never end up really being caught. And I mean, we just had something today that happened. I'm not going to touch on it a bunch because a lot of stuff is still not, a lot of information coming out is still not credible. But so, Gaffney, what do you think about all this?
The Trump administration, from the very beginning, has fed red meat to their base by coming out against a lot of social justice organizations, Antifa, BLM, with the Black Lives Matter Plaza now in DC having an official name. Trump is not thrilled about it. He's been vocal about how he's not thrilled about it, but these killings will continue to happen, so protests will continue to happen. And I'm sure Colin would love to talk about the comparison between BLM and his Twitter banner image, which is Justice for Cannon, the little white boy who was shot by a black man who was then arrested and charged, and the justice system worked. There is no need to call for justice for this child because justice has been served. The reason these protests, these riots continue to happen is because justice isn't being served. We can fight about this for days, for weeks, for months, coming up on years now for some of these notable cases where there is no justice. But this white child got justice instantly.
If I could just interrupt there really quickly, I don't think that calling for justice, like in this case, I don't think calling for justice for the killing of a child is inappropriate. I mean, I support it, but like you said, I don't think you can make these two problems equal because, like you said, the system worked in that case. The Connor's murderer got charged, got arrested, got charged, and he will most likely be convicted and spend a good portion of his life, if not the entirety of it, in jail. The main problem and why Black Lives Matter exists is that the system is not working for those people. I don't think they have even arrested the people who shot Breonna Taylor while she was literally laying on bed. And that is definitely an issue. Because when you have a system that will almost immediately arrest the killers of a white child, I don't want to draw on this, I don't want to draw criticism here, I just want to keep using that example. When you have that fast serving of justice and you compare it with what is happening in many of these other cases where you have months, if not years, before an investigation can even end, and when the investigation ends, they'll just say, "Oh, so it was justified." Like Ryan said, there was a shooting yesterday in Kenowa, Wisconsin. I believe it's Kenowa. That's how you pronounce it. Please correct me. Kenosha. Yes, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It appears the person shot is in stable condition. I hope he will remain in stable condition and will survive. But if you saw the video, and for obvious reasons, this is a Gen Z targeted live stream, so we are not showing the video. But if you have seen the video, you can see that shooting that person was completely unjustified and completely unnecessary. And you can see that if police officers hadn't had their guns drawn, they could have just easily pulled him back. And it just speaks to how police has become more and more violent where they shot someone because they had their guns out, and if they hadn't had those guns out, they could have just arrested him without pulling him back. And I just think the fact, I mean, they're saying that this man's children were in his car, and even if he survives, children can get traumatized for a lot of things. I suppose that seeing your father get shot in front of you 7 times by two white police officers is pretty high up on the list. So to answer Ryan's question, just so I can finish my quick interruption, I think that the Trump administration has completely bungled the response to this, just like they have to a lot of other things. Because Trump, and I touched on this before, most presidential candidates seeking re-election try to grow their base, and Donald Trump has been bleeding support since day one, and now he's lost Democrats, he's lost independents, he's lost moderate Democrats. He just has this tiny base, which might very well lead him to a victory. I mean, he did before, but he could have, if not for his own moral reasons, supported this movement. He could have done it for the political reasons of thinking, I only won 8% of the African American vote in 2016. I want to grow my base and expand it. He could have very easily called for police reform. He didn't have to say Black Lives Matter. He didn't have to say defund or abolish the police. He could have simply said what happened was a tragedy, was unjustified, and should not happen again, and we will work towards that. And it's just political speak. He didn't even have to seek a policy, but he could not bring himself to accept that what had happened was wrong, and he could not bring himself to just elevate George Floyd for a week. He most likely will not be able to bring himself to elevate the person shot yesterday. It's in my view, it's just sad. There's no other way to describe it but just sad, where the president of the United States cannot condemn injustice.
Yeah, I agree with you. Even if he doesn't come out in support / can't come out in support of Black Lives Matter, it would be really great to see on a personal level him validate these people. Not that they need to be validated, but to his base, really bridge that divide there. Because, and I've said this once and I'll say it again, these are humans we're talking about on all sides, or all around the circle. These are humans. And I think it would be just really great to see him uplift some of these people instead of kind of not addressing it / tearing them down after the fact. But Justin, what do you think about this?
People are out here protesting in a fucking pandemic because their friends, their family, their loved ones keep getting gunned down in the streets. And when the vice president was asked if Black Lives Matter, he responded with All Lives Matter. And I think that goes back to the idea that I've touched on before, is that we're so polarized as a nation right now that, you can't accept the fact that Black Lives Matter without having to acknowledge, all lives matter. Well, what about white people? It's not the white people that are dying in the streets right now. And, we need to recognize the urgency of this moment. And it's not even just with Black Lives Matter protests. We've seen many a failure from the Trump administration on the coronavirus front. He fails time and time again to recognize the urgency of the moment and realize that stuff needs to get done for the country to move forward in a productive way for everyone. If he acknowledged either the protesters or the coronavirus, and we can move forward with while also disagreeing. I absolutely do not support the president, but I wanted to see him succeed when it comes to the handling of any of these crises, and any of these, some of the biggest crises that any modern American president has ever seen. So I think it's just an abject failure of recognizing the moment that we're in as a country and the critical turning point that, if we keep going in this direction, it's just going to keep polarizing us and lead us to a worse and worse place as a nation.
Does anyone else have any
if I could
opinions
just
on
get
that?
a comment, and Real
Yeah.
quickly, there are very few times when the issue that benefits the public also benefits a person politically. Usually, those are two opposite things, where doing what benefits you politically is what hurts most people. And the two issues Justin mentioned, doing the right thing, doing the thing that would have benefited people the most, would have also benefited Trump politically. And that's why, for the life of me, I cannot understand why he's not doing it. Because acting on the coronavirus would have not only helped the public, but it would have helped him. He would have been able to brag that he prevented a pandemic, and that obviously didn't happen. With the Black Lives Matter movement, he could have done the right thing and come out and said that Black Lives Matter, or even just a limited version of that support, just voicing his concern, and that would have benefited him politically. So I don't get why he's not doing this, but it really, I just, again, it just makes me sad, which is really weird for a politician like Donald Trump.
It's like he doesn't understand dead people can't vote. If he was saving these lives, maybe they would vote for him.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. Talking about BLM still, or touching on it, um, we've seen a lot of the Republicans against Trump advertisements, promotions, and there is still a base of Trump supporters in Generation Z. Um, so, how do the RNC Gen Z representation compare to the DNC Gen Z's representation? Like, how do they compare? Does anyone want to touch on that? I mean, Santiago, I guess you would be best for that question. So, how does the RNC Gen Z representation compare to the DNC Gen Z representation?
Yeah, so I think that Colin made a really good point earlier where Gen Z, I mean, we grew up in a recession. We were born with 9/11.
Mhm.
We're graduating from high school and going into college in the middle of a pandemic. So our political beliefs are, at the end of the day, have been and are going to be formed by our life experiences. And I feel confident in saying that our life experiences are different from most other generations. So the fact that we might, let me restart that, we're generally, the younger generations tend to go to the left. So every generation is more liberal or more generally socially liberal than their parents or the grandparents. Yes,
Progressive.
we might see something really weird this time around, and it connects to what Justin mentioned earlier, where just we're so divided and we're so polarized that we might not see that movement that we've generally seen. Where if someone was born into a conservative family and went with conservative policies most of their lives, we might not see that shift that we generally see of them moving a little bit towards left. And I think that comparison between conservative Gen Z and liberal Gen Z has never been starker than right now. If you go, I mean, I don't generally use TikTok, but I've been going around it since we launched Save Voters of Tomorrow TikTok. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Ever since we launched that, I've been looking around on TikTok. And there is this really clear distinction between conservative TikTok and liberal TikTok. And I mean, it's both Gen Z, it's just the type of videos they're making, and they're completely different. Like, I mean, if you saw it, you would think that they were made by different generations, but they're really not. And I think Colin and Justin can probably expand on this, but I just think that the general polarization of our society is also polarizing Gen Z in a way that we have never seen before, and I find that really strange.
So still speaking about Gen Z, this is going to be kind of our last question before we wrap things up, but I want to get everybody's opinion on this one as well. So this is, as we know, this is the first presidential election Gen Z will really be involved in. I personally find that Gen Zers are more conservative than millennials in general on a spectrum, stemming from fiscal conservatism. How do you guys think this will affect the election? I know some of us agree. I mean, there's statistics everywhere for this. I know we're all on different sides of the ring here, but I'm just curious on your opinion on all of this. So, Colin, what do you think about this?
I think with Gen Z, you do see like, while they might not be like more conservative, you do see like their political differences more clearly, as opposed to millennials. Where like if you saw like a millennial Republican, it'd be like, oh my gosh, a millennial Republican, it's a unicorn. Oh my gosh. But I think we are in very political times, and we are a more politically diverse generation than the millennials. And I'm on TikTok, and I see like broad Republican support from like Gen Z on TikTok, and you guys might see more like liberal representation on TikTok, but it's more evenly divided than the previous generation. And while we might be more fiscally conservative, I think socially we're going to the left because growing up, we're growing up in a more diverse surroundings because we're more culturally, ethnically, and so on diverse, and we're more like accepting of that than previous generations, I think.
Yeah, I think Gen Z is very accepting of, spectrums, and that not everybody has to be one thing or the other, that it's kind of on a line and you can fall into place anywhere there. Gaffney, what is your opinion on how you think it'll affect the voter turnout and how you think Gen Z will vote?
I personally don't think that Gen Z is more conservative in any way. And I think that's probably because we grew up in a recession and we saw what it means to be facing harder financial choices. And that combined with our unprecedented access to technology has given us the ability to be connected to this information in a way that no other generation has before. The sharing of ideas, how do we solve this problem? I have a solution to your problem. These can happen so rapidly now. And I think that that's probably going to lead to most of the youth vote that does turn out going to Biden or a third-party candidate. But let's be honest, until we abolish the Electoral College and thus eliminate a two-party system, we're not going to see a third-party candidate that legitimately represents Gen Z and its ideals. We know that the political compass goes in multiple directions, but establishment Dems and establishment Republicans are both auth-right. We've got this whole other field of the world here that isn't represented, and that means that we're all having to settle this election.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, well, I think we had a really great conversation this evening.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap things up. Thank you, Santiago, Gaffney, Justin, and Colin for joining me tonight. This was a lot of fun. I feel like I learned a lot about you guys from this, and I'm really excited to do more stuff like this. For the audience, thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate all your support, especially all the support you've been showing recently. Once again, if you don't know who we are, you can follow us at Voters Tomorrow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can also find us online at votersoftomorrow.org. Do you guys have anything to say?
I just go ahead.
Justin?
So I would just like to add, if you guys can, we would really appreciate any amount that you can donate. It's small dollar donors, and it's viewers like you guys that are dedicated to our mission and to making sure that Gen Z is represented. It's really those small donations that keep us going. So anything
100%.
that you're capable of donating, from the bottom of our hearts and all of us, we're really just grateful for you guys and glad that you chose to watch us tonight. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Justin. Anybody else? We're good?
Well, this is my first time participating in something like this, and I just want to thank the viewers and you guys as well for having me here. I would have liked to touch in on the Black Lives Matter movement a bit more. It has challenged my opinions, and I do feel those same feelings for George Floyd and all the other countless victims of police brutality that I feel towards Cannon Hinnant, who was killed with no reason at all, and his sisters will be traumatized for the rest of their lives. And I just didn't want to make the comparison to people who did not get justice. And when I first heard about that news, I was upset, of course. But when I stepped back and heard the arguments opposing that, I kind of realized and challenged my beliefs a little bit. So thank you guys for touching on that important subject. And I would love to talk about it more on my personal Twitter, but I don't want to take too much time here, so I'll hand it off to you guys.
Yeah, so I just
And
have one
anybody
final
else?
comment. If, like we plugged in last time, Voters Tomorrow is producing a podcast, which I don't know, these people here should
Yeah.
be able to tell you when it's coming out, because I don't know. But soon, we're putting out a podcast episode soon. Next week, we're putting out a podcast episode next week. So if you're liked what you heard, you would like to hear more from Ryan, Gaffney, and Justin, be sure to stay tuned and listen to the podcast. Colin and I might pop in occasionally just to add some extra context.
Maybe.
But yeah, so thank you everyone for joining, and I'll pass it back to Ryan.
Alrighty, y'all. So we're just going to say goodbye now. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the Republican National Convention. Make sure you get educated. Make sure you watch it. Know what's going on. And thank you guys all for watching. We really appreciate it. Have a great night. And